Welcome to the Real Estate Crowdfunding Show, syndication in the digital age at gowercrowd.com for another special Life in the Day of C19 podcast. Adam Gower here, and I have a very important guest on the show today, Jason Chudoba, partner at ICR Inc. ICR are a strategic communications and advisory company, which really doesn't say the half of it. They are absolutely blow away amazing PR and corporate communications people, and Jason is one of the top guys over there. And I asked Jason to join me today to discuss crisis communications, particularly, of course, as it applies to today's immediate crisis, coronavirus. And it does apply to anybody. Actually, what we talk about today, even though, of course, my focus, as you know, is on commercial real estate, everything that we talk about today applies to just about anybody who's been affected and who has a customer base. Now, again, because this is a special Life in the Day of C19 episode, there is, as you will come to realize, a lot of resources around today's episode. So based on my conversation with Jason, conversations with my clients, and actually my undergraduate work, digging deep into my educational background in crowd, political, and media psychology when I was at the LSE, I've written a guide for you on exactly how to communicate with your investors, clients, and customers during these times of crisis. It's totally free, and there is a mercifully short video that I put together for you showing you exactly how to structure your email communications to your audiences today when you and they both need that. And that is all on the podcast page for today's episode at gowercrowd.com, right? Crisis communications. Keep an eye out for that. Important stuff. You will also find their links to Jason and to ICR and their really incredible C19 resources. All right. That's all, like I said, there at the podcast page at gowercrowd.com. All right. Let's get straight into it with one of the country's top experts in PR and corporate communications, Jason Chudoba, partner at ICR Inc. Jason, thank you so very much for joining me. This is a very, very important call that we are going to have today. I am delighted to be talking to you today on this special episode of my podcast. I'm calling this little series A Life in the Day of C19. Right, basically, because we are dealing with an extraordinary situation, and what I'd love to talk to you about, would like to hear your views on, is particularly for real estate developers, right? We're both in the real estate space particularly, but for really anybody that's listening, investors or anybody who has a business, what is the best way of adjusting one's communication, particularly online, in this particular crisis that we're in now, or in any kind of crisis, but focusing on this one as a case study?
It really is unprecedented times right now, Adam. We're seeing it on a day-to-day basis with our clients. And I think what is undeniable is the magnitude and severity of this event and the impact on the commercial real estate industry is yet to be seen. We're already seeing certain segments of commercial real estate market being hit a lot harder than others. In particular, you have the lodging space and the retail sectors right now, which are really feeling the brunt of the social distancing and the travel restrictions, as well as some of the challenges dealing with development projects. These capital intensive projects are kind of being put on pause and being looked at differently as the market continues to fluctuate. Concerns related to capital are factoring into decisions. So companies now are in a heightened state in terms of how do they communicate with their stakeholders in terms of what they need to know about our business. And this is not easy because you don't have all the answers. And with any crisis situation, in the absence of facts, you have to do your best to communicate the process. And whenever you put yourself out there and you're going to communicate with your constituents, there's a lot of things you need to factor in the equation, when there are those unknowns in the marketplace? What are you okay with the market knowing? What are you hesitant to put out there that you can't take back? So it's a big responsibility, and we've spent a lot of time working with clients to really think about how to do that. I think what's universal with all crisis situations is you have to be very mindful of who you're speaking to. Multiple clients have different audiences, and some may require different forms of communication, different tonality, different messages. So you really need to factor that into the equation.
Right. So let's talk about the specifics of how to communicate. So there's a couple things that are on my mind, particularly. One is, first of all, do you yank all your usual social activity? Right. So, for example, I have this insane stream of high value social media, how to, project your company's presence online. This, 6 or so posts every single day go out. I've actually stopped it completely because it seems insensitive to what's going on. Yet some of my clients, they think that they're confident that the world will turn back again, right? That we will recover. And so they want to stay the course and inject C-19 related or crisis related communications. What are you seeing your clients do, and how are you advising your clients in that regard?
Yeah, and Adam, I wish there was a universal answer for this, but really it's situational. Again, different segments, different types of companies are being impacted more than others. And really what a crisis is, it's forcing you to operate in a non-business as normal environment. And the challenges associated with that are robust. You're right, you can absolutely come off as tone deaf or insensitive to the situation. And, perception is reality in these cases. So, if you're continuing to put messages out there into the marketplace, every time you do that, you're taking a bit of a risk. So with our clients, we've told them, you have to really understand what your audience expects of you. And you need to put yourself in the shoes of the individuals you're speaking with. So in many cases, it's not let's absolutely suspend our social presence or the way we normally communicate with these audiences, but let's think about it a little bit differently, right? Let's maybe pull back the frequency of that communication. Let's think about the messages we're trying to offer up, right? If your traditional social engagement or other engagement is more sales oriented, right? You don't want to be seen as you're trying to capitalize on a situation where people are suffering. And the magnitude of that suffering and how people deal with that is different on all levels. So you want to make sure the content that you're putting out there is tactful. It is going to be perceived as being of value to the audience. So for instance, you have hospitality operators out there, some clients of ours where you're working to maintain an image of a property, right? There's people running through the sand, there's people hanging out at a pool. During times like this, that's really not the type of messaging you want to get out there. So how do we pull that back, and how do we still engage and help people understand what we're doing? So it's, we're open for business. Here are all the things we're doing to keep our environment safe, to protect our employees. If you need more information on our travel, go here. It's about directing them to the places where they need to go to get answers to their likely questions. But again, all situations are different, and all companies have their own risk profiles. So it's about being able to understand that and give the right counsel.
All right, so let's talk through some actual examples, if you don't mind. But before we do that, actually, I do want to talk about this idea of capitalizing, this question that you brought up, capitalizing on suffering, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I remember from the last downturn was that after the initial wave of shock and horror had engulfed the market, remember, it was completely different. It was a financial crisis last time. Let's hope it doesn't bubble into that this time. But once that had died down, there came along a wave of increasingly confident, opportunistic messaging, right? This is a good time to buy. Yeah. And I'm already beginning to see that, right, in commercial real estate. People are slowly beginning to feel confident that it's okay to say, this presents a good buy opportunity. I'm glad I've got dry powder. line up behind me because this is going to be a good opportunity. So how do you, if that is your point of view, and that is what you want to put forward, right, that you do have this point of view, how do you articulate that?
Yeah.
Jason?
So you're right. Anyone who tells me that they know with certainty that anything is going to be the right thing to do at this point in time, would make me pause and really think about just how sure this individual is with the recommendation. Nobody has a crystal ball, right? So I do think you need to be thoughtful in terms of how you frame that opportunity. So you're right. You might be operating in a business that is not being materially impacted from an operational standpoint as it relates to all the challenges associated with COVID. And you might be able to offer some real value to a certain constituent, whether it's raising capital to take advantage of buying opportunities in the market. Interest rates are lower. What does that mean? How do we go ahead and make sure we're putting our investors' capital to good work? So you can still work to find ways to do that. I think the key here, though, is how you present that information to the marketplace, right? So it's being mindful that there is significant disruption in the marketplace. We understand you're going through certain challenges in your own business when you evaluate how to allocate capital or where and why you want to do that. And we know on individuals, for instance, that are using crowdfunding platforms in particular to build the real estate portfolios. When thinking about an individual versus an institution, there's a big difference there. If I could say, where institutions are dealing with lots of money and have significantly more experience investing through real estate cycles and economic cycles, you have an individual investor who is working to put their hard-earned capital to work. So when you're talking to the different audiences, you need to be mindful of that. With an institutional investor, obviously, you could be more sophisticated in how you deliver that message and doing that in a way that says, here's something that we can talk about when the time is right for you. We've identified opportunities. We want to be respectful of what you're going through, but we also want to make sure you're aware of what we're seeing in the marketplace and how we think we can help you. So that's one way you might want to frame the message. Again, there's no right way to do this. There's no universal way to do this. It's about being perceived as being thoughtful of the situation that people are going through. And with an individual investor too, I think there's a heightened sense of, am I going to be scammed here, when you see somebody going out in the middle of a crisis saying, hey, I can help you, earn X return on your investment, put your money with me. I think if you want to be perceived as a responsible operator and somebody who is approaching this the right way, be mindful of how you approach them and maybe not ask and try to do this as a hard sell.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we talk about this, I think about the stock market, and people clearly, and this is not an area of my expertise, by the way, I'm absolutely clueless in terms of the stock market, but I do see a lot of discussion about strategies for investing on the stock market. Mm-hmm. And clearly there are, human stories behind Sure. those trades just as much as there are in real estate, but somehow it's a more personal discussion when it comes to real estate, right? Somehow it's closer to us than that distant stock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, a stock, if you think about it, it's again, piece of paper, right? In reality, but now things are being able to be traded at lightning speed. When you're investing through a brokerage account, right, your money goes out there and you trust your advisors are putting it to good work, and you kind of step away and you're hoping you're trusting those advisors to make the right decisions for you. The Schwabs of the world, the TD Ameritrades out there. When it comes to investing in real estate, the opportunities that individuals now have access to had historically been only available to institutions in the past, right? So when you're thinking about real estate, it is a hard asset, right? The life cycle on those things, depending on how you're investing, you can't trade out of the market at lightning speed as you can with a real security. With a real estate investment, you want to make sure that you're helping your audience. If we're talking about an investment, right, you want to make sure you help your audience understand what they're committing to, especially during times like this, right? If there's a 3 to 5 to 7 year lockup period for your capital before you're going to see any return. Putting your capital to work and a real estate investment, is a longer term commitment than if you were going to give some money to your, put some money in your brokerage account and go trade stocks. So you're right, Adam. There's a very real, kind of tangible attachment to real estate. And when you're making these decisions, if you're investing in REIT securities, that's one thing, right? But if you're investing through crowdfunding platforms or private equity funds, it's a different type of time horizon.
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting distinction that you're making, actually. So what are the kinds of responses that you're seeing commercial real estate sponsors doing? You've mentioned that it's very much individual company and individual person related, right? How they choose to communicate, whether they yank all their social media activity, whether they continue it, whether they send emails, for example, to their databases. So what are you seeing as the variety that companies are electing?
I think one piece of advice I give the listening audience here is during times of crisis situations, people often feel paralyzed and want to pull back from how they normally communicate. That can be equally as detrimental than communicating on a more frequent basis, right? It shows, you're not doing enough to get in front of your audiences to let them know how this is impacting the business. So I would encourage people to be very mindful of that. Companies are operating differently, right? For instance, you'll have some landlords where, in the retail space in particular, where their businesses are being really impacted, in terms of having to close, delaying their expansion plans, landlords pulling back on, again, development plans. So some of the retail landlords, we're looking at how do we communicate with tenants, right? And how do we do this in a way where it's going to be, okay, we're going out there saying something that we're okay and able to live with. The first thing you think about is, hey, are you going to give me a rent reduction? I think in many cases, it's probably too early to tell. So you really want to be very careful in terms of what you're communicating to your constituents, because once you put something out there, or once you offer something to somebody and not somebody else, therein lies problems. So consistency in communication is really important. I think, helping your audiences understand that you're aware of the situation, you understand the impact that this is having on your business. If you have any questions, please contact us. We'll help talk you through the situation. I think in any event, you really want to try where it makes sense to take these conversations, offline, especially on the social realm, but also when it comes to communicating via email, right? If you could get on a phone call, in some instances, it might be more personable and helping you understand the true situation that somebody is going to. And at the end of the day, these landlords might not be able to commit to doing something, but at the very least, their tenant feels like they've been heard and they're aware of the situation. In other cases, it's it's more of a communication of here are all the things we are thinking about and all the things that we are aware of. You're seeing publicly traded companies right now issue communications as it relates to dividends, the suspension of guidance, how our business is being impacted by COVID. You're seeing REITs put communications out there even after having recent earnings calls in terms of how they're looking at their financial profiles and their projections and their guidance. So all things to think about.
Yeah, I like that actually. So the first part of communication is to describe what you're seeing in the landscape, right? What are all the headwinds that are affecting our business? So the way I'm thinking about this, and my last question actually, if you were to write an email that you were going to send out to your database, right? And that could cover everybody in your database, but the world I live in is investors, right? Sponsors raising money online. So if you want to send out an email, how do you structure that email? And what I think you just answered is that first part of the communication, an acknowledgement of what is happening and what are the influences that are impacting the business without maybe any judgment or action statement. And then you move on to something else, don't you? Then you move on to a description of how are we reacting to these, right? Are you seeing that?
You nailed it, Adam. Yeah. The acknowledgement of the situation. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're tracking. Here's what we want you to be aware of. So I think if you think about it that way, you'll have better receptivity to what you're trying to have your audience retain out there. You absolutely don't want to come across as tone deaf. And the other thing I think anybody needs to ask themselves is when they're putting these communications out there, you cannot assume that it is just going to the audience as you intend. I tell my clients all the time, are you okay if the media gets their hands on this, right? So in the digital world we live in, communications have their way of making it from point A to point B. And if you're having an aggressive letter and people consider that tone deaf or inappropriate, they'll pass it along to a member of the media and say, here's one of the ways that this company is out of touch. So it's likely a smaller risk, but it's a risk that these companies need to be aware of when they think about communicating in situations like this, where there's a heightened sense of when there's heightened sensitivity across the board, really.
So once you then discuss, and I'm just going to continue this line of thought on if you're going to structure an email. So you start with an acknowledgement of what's going on, move on to how you are actually dealing with all these issues, that kind of the ways that it's impacting what you're doing and how you're reacting to that. And then, and this is how I've been trying to figure out how to formulate emails for myself and also for clients. Then to wrap up with a look forward, which is where you can kind of tie back this idea perhaps of optimism. If you think we're going to go off the edge of a precipice, right, that's fine if that's what you think. But presumably you want to stay in business and you want people around you to believe that the world is going to keep on going, and etc.
So I think you're going down the right path. And on the end part about the optimism looking forward, I would caution anyone to be measured in how they communicate that, because again, we don't know, and we don't want to pretend like we know. We don't want to speculate or predict anything where we'd have to pull back in the end. At the end of the day, people want to know that you're paying attention to what's going on. They want to know that you continue to prioritize them. They want to know that you have a plan in place, and they want to know that you're taking all the necessary steps to protect your business, have it ensure that it can function during and after disruptive events. And then what these individuals can expect from you on a go-forward basis. Is our business changing the way we're operating, right? And if so, here are the ways we're changing, and here's how you can consider engaging with us, right? So things like that. If the other situation you might want to think about is, if the method of communicating has changed. Don't expect to see regular emails from us, or don't expect our phone lines to be open because we're having an exceedingly high volume of calls. The quickest way to get in touch with us and learn how we can help you through this situation, because we're all in this together, please contact us the following way. You have to work hard to put yourselves in the shoes of the receiver of this information and ask yourself, what would I want to hear if I was that audience, right? And you might not be able to address all of that, but try to lay your email out, try to lay your communications out in a way that proactively answers as many questions as you can. And then if you don't have answers to other, try and allude to the process you're taking to get that information or figure out how to move forward in the best path.
Fascinating, Jason. I knew it would be fantastic talking to you today.
Well, it's my pleasure.
So what about frequency of communication, right? So, we do weekly emails. There's various reasons for that. We have a weekly newsletter. We track behavior online, and et cetera, so we need data. So there's a temptation to yank that as well, right? So like, why would anybody want to know about the difference between the IRR and equity multiple? It's like, what?
You're 100% right, and the answer is they might not, or they probably don't during this environment. But what they care about at this time might be something you can help them find, right? For information as to how this is impacting this industry, consider going here to get information. Or here are some very helpful pieces, articles that we've read and we valued and think they do a good job summarizing the information. What we're trying to do at our firm is use the institutional knowledge of the people we have to aggregate information, right? And figure out the type of information that our clients want and put it in a place where they can get it easily. So, and a lot of this is not, content that is exclusively produced by my firm. We're tracking analyst reports, and and we're also tracking industry reports. We're tracking what's been said on government agencies' websites. So it's about helping these audiences find information that would be helpful to them in terms of making business decisions, right, or making capital allocation decisions. And it's hard for you to say, I'm going to continue to do this on a weekly basis, right? Because as I said before, you want to make sure the information is of value. You don't want it to come across as noise, right? So consider asking yourself, if we communicate on a weekly basis, and if we're shifting our strategy in terms of how we need to speak to these audiences, is a normal course the right way to go about it? And if the answer is no, and you're going to go on a different path, what can you commit to doing and providing value on a regular basis? So perhaps you're doing it, once every 2 weeks or once every month. I think if you get beyond a month and you have a regular cadence in your normal course of staying in front of your audience, then you kind of lose touch. And you don't want to do that. So you have to really figure out what the right cadence is. And even if that's pulling it back a little bit, but still being able to provide them with something, that might be a solution to consider.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. So what you do, or what I think you just suggested, is to leverage content that is out there that you consider to be high value, because there is a lot of noise, right, during a crisis, an unbelievable amount. So if you do have good access to resources you have confidence in, to distribute those in place perhaps of your own original content that you may be used to creating on a regular basis. And I must say, actually, for any for the two guys that are listening, if he's the one guy still on on the podcast now, but I actually subscribe to your weekly, I think it's weekly news bulletin. It is absolutely by far one of the best that I see, and that's actually a pretty decent idea to use resources and to distribute them. But what about communicating how you think about it? Look, people invest with people, right? Sure. And it's great that you're giving them resources, but they really want to know, first of all, if they've invested with you, how's my investment doing? Mm-hmm. And if they are thinking of investing with you, and as a sponsor, you want them to think that way, right? Especially if you believe it's going to pull out, you do want to be nurturing them even during this period of crisis. So how often do you communicate, do you think, and I know it's on a person by person basis, so maybe, how often are you seeing your clients express their own personal views of what's going on and keeping people updated with, the rapidly changing environment?
Yeah, again, I hate this answer, but it's one we often use when it comes to communications, is it depends, right? And you alluded to that before, but I do think the best case to look at is really the publicly traded REITs and some of the other C Corps out there, not exclusive to real estate, in terms of the information they're putting out in the marketplace in the form of a press release, a letter to shareholders about how we're viewing the current situation, how it's impacting our business. Adam, when we spoke before, you had asked about, should you use video, and what mediums and types of communication should we use to communicate? That's also really important when you're considering how to get out in front of your audience. So I think in the more sophisticated investor landscape, I think there's an expectation among your limited partners or your other defined investor, that you will be providing them with some information as to how this is impacting or how this has the potential to impact my investment. So I think there's an expectation there. And if the normal course of communicating with your LPs is through a letter, you might want to consider doing that. The scope of the information, again, and how far and deep you want to go, is contingent upon the company and what they normally provide and what they're comfortable saying. Video can be a very powerful method in terms of communicating. Look no further than Arne Sorensen and the email he sent out to his Marriott counterparts in the world last week about the significant troubles that Marriott is facing dealing with COVID-19. In my personal opinion, that video does a fantastic job of humanizing the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, showing empathy and giving the market a really good understanding of how this situation is impacting the business in the near and the potential long term. So that came across well. The issue with videos are if you're not a sophisticated speaker and you don't have the time or the resources to produce something that's top quality, it could be one of the more riskier forms for communicating with your constituents, right? And when I am with clients and I'm going through media training or presentation training, I'm losing you, Adam, in terms of I can't hear your voice.
I know. I was actually, I'm not home alone in my studio, and I'm put myself on mute in order to say, stop making that bloody noise. I'm listening to you, but I've put myself, you heard me speaking. I should have done that.
So no worries. So let's go back to video again. Marriott is a good case of how video can be used effectively, but there's many other cases out there where how video can go the wrong way. My point was, when you're on video, the stakes are much higher because it's not only the words that you're saying that people are listening to, but your body language also plays a significant role in how people interpret information, how people view the credibility of the information coming out of your mouth. In fact, we argue, and there's research out there that shows body language impacts the vast majority of what people take away from a video or a form of communication. So that needs to be factored into the equation when you're thinking about, do I use video to go out and get in front of my audience, or do I use another form of communication, whether that's an email, whether it's a letter, whether it's a conference call? All these types of nuances and factors need to make their way into the decision-making process.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point actually you made there, that probably jumping in for the first time with video to address a crisis situation is probably not the best idea. If it is something that you are comfortable with and have been using habitually over time, then maybe it's okay to do it. I would actually beg to differ on one point. I'm not sure that you really need a Hollywood standard, production to be really, really effective. Right. I mean, you look, if I'm on a video call now, for anybody that actually watches this rather than just listens to it, you can see it's reasonably decent quality. You don't have to have a full film crew there. But I think the point that you're making is that to take away is it's not a time to experiment with new forms of communication. Use that which is the most comfortable to you. Right, that you're used to doing, and leverage that which you do best, to get your message.
You summarized it really well, and you're right. With the advent of how communication has evolved, using Zoom, you can be very powerful in producing good content. And my point there is, you should be familiar utilizing the forms of communication that you're going out there with, because now is generally not the best time to experiment unless you absolutely need to in whatever circumstance. So being mindful of what you can get out there in real time and do it well is really important.
All right, let's wrap up with some questions. I would love to talk to you more about it. But I don't want to spend too much of your time this afternoon. So I've got one final question before my three final questions. Right? Just to like that thing. So, okay. So this actually dovetails into one of the final questions, the final three questions. But what is just one of the things that I learned? Somebody told me the best way to learn to play golf is not to watch a pro. This is when I was growing up, because they do it perfectly, is to watch a complete hacker, because then you can see all the things that they're doing wrong, right? And it's easy not to make those same mistakes. It's a lot harder to see somebody do it perfectly and try and replicate. So with that in mind, what would you say are the three worst things you could do? right now in
Yeah.
terms of PR?
Yeah, I think that so if I could limit it to three, I think go out there and do something that is off the cuff, right? If you see, just because my peers or my competitors are doing something, I need to get something out in the marketplace quickly. I think you want to avoid the impulse reaction to communication, and that can be dangerous. I think the other dangerous misstep you need to be cognizant of is saying too much. Everyone is looking for answers, right? But there's not an expectation, I think, in the marketplace that you're going to have those. But being mindful that we're aware many of you have questions and we're doing our best and we're tracking this as closely as we can. And when we have more information, we'll communicate it in due course. And I think the other mistake really is to come across as callous or tone deaf to the situation at hand. This is a crisis of epic proportions. And what's different from recessions of the past, give it the financial crisis, have it be the swine flu. This is a different type of crisis event where it is a bug that you cannot see that is impacting the health of individuals, right? Not just their pocketbooks, which it also is doing. So you have that compounded by the fact that people are dying in the world right now, so that there's a heightened level of sensitivity around, good, thoughtful communications, and going out there the wrong way can have a damaging impact to your brand. I don't know if I think it was Warren Buffett who said this, and I've heard this quote used many times over the course of my career, but it takes years and years to build up a solid reputation. It is arguably the most invaluable intangible asset on the balance sheet. It takes 2 minutes to ruin it if you do something stupid or out of touch. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about communicating.
All right. So that actually, I think, really is the answer to my first of three sign-off questions, which was, what's the most important thing to keep in mind for somebody who might otherwise be paralyzed by inaction? It's easy to just shut down and to stop communicating.
Yeah. What's the most important thing to keep in mind is there is an expectation among your stakeholders that you will continue to provide them with information. The extent, the depth of that information is really what the question is, right? What you need to think about yourself is, these people are relying on me. If I've positioned myself as a partner to them, whether I'm a sponsor or whether I'm a service provider, I need to be willing to function as that partner during times of good times and bad times, right? So it's how do I go out there and how do I communicate with them and do it in a way that shows that I'm living up to my promise to function the right way and communicate open and transparently. And I think people are, generally people are reasonable when it comes to these types of situations, knowing that there is so much unknown out there and so much uncertainty that it's okay to say, we don't have that information right now, but we're doing the best we can to figure it out. And once we have the right information, we'll go ahead and communicate that to you.
So my second last question of three is, I normally ask people, what's the hardest lesson you've learned online? Because my podcast is all about digital marketing and content marketing.
Right.
But in the context of what we're talking about, could you describe like the hardest lesson you've learned in PR, for example?
Yeah, well, there's I think two answers to that question. I think the hardest thing a company could learn online is that it is a two-way communication stream. In the early days, companies were still trying to figure out how to use social media effectively. And non-savvy clients who are looking to get in and use social media now and they haven't done it before, just keep in mind that you're opening yourself up to the opinions of an infinite universe to some degree. And you need to be okay with that. You need to be okay with people having opinions, and you need to be thoughtful in terms of how you're able to respond to those, if at all. Again, all companies are different. So that's a very difficult lesson to learn on social media, and how when your intent might be good-natured, the outcome and the perception among an audience of people with different agendas and different viewpoints can turn that into something else entirely. And you need to be able to deal with that outcome. And then in public relations, I think a very important lesson that all companies should think about is during times like this, where the stakes are high and where people are relying on others, is that now is the time to think about, functioning as a responsible corporate citizen above all else. It's I'm going to be perceived in a certain way based on my judgments, and I need to be okay with that. I'm not advocating people to go out there and do more than they're comfortable with doing. I just want everyone to be mindful that the way you react in these types of situations is ultimately how you're going to be judged. And it's one of the reasons why people like myself are in business, because they hire consultants, not just PR firms, to help them manage through these situations. So if you have access to good advisors, friends that are in public relations, make sure to mine your network for good thoughts and advice, and try to avoid the gut shot reaction to getting information in the marketplace.
Fascinating. All right, my last question. So what are your key daily habits? And again, my usual question is, what are your key daily habits to be successful online? Yeah. So what would you say? Gosh, yes. Here we are all stuck at home. So what are your key daily, what habits do you have that keep you sane? Yeah. I suppose it's a little bit different.
There's different habits I have. So daily habits that I have are just trying to consume as much information as I can about what's happening in the universe for where I operate, and I'm being relied upon by executives and board members to provide sound, informed counsel. You can't do that unless you know what's going on in the world. So just being very mindful, and I think your listeners can apply that to their business, right? Just pay very close attention to how your customers or how your tenants or how your investors are digesting, receiving, and interpreting information. So think about that. So daily habits are going out of your way to try and be as informed as possible. And then being successful online, that's a whole nother universe, right? It's how do I maintain my own personal brand? I think personally I could do a better job doing that. My client work oftentimes keeps me away from spending time building my own personal brand. But I think when you go ahead and do that, you have to be somebody that can contribute to the marketplace of ideas in a way that is going to not just be noise, right? So if you're looking to build your own brand as a company or as an individual, offer substance, offer good, thoughtful content, and add context to it, and try not to be overly promotional.
Jason Chudoba of ICR. And now, is that acronym of a full name, or is that is the name of the company?
The name of the company is ICR now, but in the past we were Integrated Corporate Relations. So that was a mouthful, right, in communications. So we rebranded to ICR, and we are a full service corporate communications firm. We work with companies across all their needs, whether it be public relations, investor relations, digital branding, corporate governance, and pretty much everything in between. So, we're working with clients day in and day out as it relates to this situation, and doing our best to inform them with good counsel.
Jason, as always, my interactions with you and people on your team, but it's always a real pleasure. You clearly are one of the top professional shops in the country, probably in the world. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Hopefully one day we may have an opportunity to meet in person.
I hope so, Adam. Thanks for the kind words. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to talking further.
All right, that was Jason Chudoba, partner at ICR Inc., Strategic Communications and Advisory, with some incredibly important, tangible, and actionable insights and guidance for you in your communications during these times of crisis. Be sure to go to the podcast page for today's episode. There is a wealth of resources there for you, including a guide that I've put together that goes through crisis communications specifically in detail, so that you can get out to your audience and your clients and your investors at the most important time, really, which is not only when you need to be getting out there to communicate, but when they need you to be there as well. As I like to say, don't just be there when they have their wallets in their hands, right? This is a time when everybody is hunkered down. They might not be spending, they might not be investing, but this is the time to communicate. This is when you really can shine by standing out and providing valuable information to your audience. So go ahead to the podcast page, download that guide that I've put together specifically for you, specifically on crisis communication. It's probably the most important document you can download and act on this year, right? All right, that's it. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you, Jason Chudoba, partner at ICR Inc. It was a true pleasure talking to you. I know you're busy. You guys are out there in terms of the way you communicate. Goodness me. Role models, if nothing else. Really, I value your weekly newsletter, and your C19 resources are really amazing. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, Jason. All right, that's it. That's all for this episode. I will see you next time. Be well. And for now, this is Dr. Adam Gower signing off.